First contact in crisis. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow through the engineering bay as Raven Nash frantically worked at her console. The ship's normal comforting hum had given way to an unsettling silence, broken only by the soft whir of failing backup systems. Primary power grids down, she muttered, fingers flying across the holographic interface. Environmental controls failing. This isn't good. Across the room, Kiri Th's iridescent scales shifted color from their usual calm blue to a worried purple. The Centaurian engineer's four-fingered hands moved with precise grace over another console, each motion deliberate and measured. Temperature dropping rapidly, Kiri Th noted, their melodic voice carrying an edge of concern. Backup systems insufficient. We have perhaps 3 hours before hypothermia becomes a risk. Raven pushed away from her station, running a hand through her short dark hair. There has to be a way to restore power. These systems were checked yesterday, they were perfect. Perhaps not as perfect as believed, Kiri Th responded, their head frills rippling thoughtfully. This failure appears targeted. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. They were the only two awake on the research vessel, the rest of the crew in cryo-sleep for the long journey between systems. If this was sabotage, they were on their own. We need to conserve heat, Raven said, checking the environmental readouts. Most of the ship is already below freezing. This section still has residual warmth from the equipment, but it won't last. Kiri Th's scales shifted to a deeper purple. Centaurians are less tolerant of cold than humans. My species requires ambient temperatures above what you would consider comfortable. Raven looked at her alien colleague with growing concern. While they had worked together for months, their interactions had been purely professional. Centaurians were known for their reserved nature and strict personal boundaries. But survival meant putting cultural differences aside. The emergency shelter pod, Raven suggested. It's insulated, designed to maintain livable conditions even without power. We can seal ourselves in until we figure this out. Kiri Th's frills flattened, a sign of discomfort. The pod is quite confined. I know, Raven said softly. But we don't have much choice. Your body temperature is already dropping, I can see it in your scales. After a moment's hesitation, Kiri Th nodded. Your logic is sound, though the situation is unfortunate. They gathered what emergency supplies they could find and made their way to the shelter pod. It was indeed small, barely 2 meters square, with thermal padding on all sides and a single shared sleeping platform. As they sealed themselves inside, Raven could feel the awkwardness between them. Kiri Th stood rigidly in one corner, their scales cycling through shades of purple and blue. Your discomfort is understandable, Raven said, trying to break the tension. But we're engineers, we solve problems. This is just another problem to solve. Kiri Th's head frills rippled in what Raven had learned was their equivalent of a slight smile. You humans have an interesting way of simplifying complex situations. It's a gift, Raven replied with a small grin. Now, tell me more about Centaurian thermal regulation. The more I understand, the better we can manage this situation. As Kiri Th began explaining their biology, Raven noticed their scales slowly shifting back toward their normal blue. Maybe they could find a way to bridge their differences, at least until they solved the mystery of the power failure. But as the temperature continued to drop and the hours stretched ahead, Raven couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had orchestrated this situation. The question was, why? Breaking barriers. The shelter pod's temperature gauge continued its steady decline, though slower than the rest of the ship. Raven watched as her breath formed small clouds in the dimly lit space. Beside her, Kiri Th's scales had taken on a deeper purple hue, their body instinctively trying to absorb what little heat remained. Your core temperature is dropping too fast, Raven observed, checking the bio readings on her wrist display. The thermal padding isn't enough. Kiri Th's head frills trembled slightly. I am managing. Though I admit, this is quite challenging. Raven hesitated before speaking her next words. Look, no Centaurians have strict protocols about personal space, but we need to share body heat. It's basic survival. The alien engineer's iridescent scales flickered rapidly, cycling through various shades of blue and purple. That would be highly irregular. More irregular than freezing. Raven countered, trying to keep her tone gentle. I know it's uncomfortable, but we're beyond standard protocols here. Kiri-Th's head frills rippled in what Raven had learned was contemplation. You propose physical proximity for thermal regulation? Yes, Raven said, suppressing a smile at their formal phrasing. Human body temperature runs higher than yours. It could help stabilize your thermal readings until we figure out what happened to the power. After what seemed like an eternity, Kiri-Th nodded. Your suggestion is logical. Though this breaks numerous cultural taboos. I promise to respect your boundaries, Raven said softly. Just tell me what's acceptable and what isn't. They arranged themselves on the narrow sleeping platform, Kiri-Th's tall, slender form initially rigid with discomfort. Their scales were cool to the touch, almost like smooth glass, but Raven could feel a subtle warmth beneath. Your species generates remarkable heat, Kiri-Th observed, their voice carrying a note of fascination. Is this typical? Pretty standard for humans, Raven replied, trying to maintain a professional tone despite their intimate proximity. Our metabolic rate keeps us warm even in cold conditions. Though this is pushing it. As minutes passed, she felt Kiri-Th gradually relax, their scales warming slightly where they touched. The alien's head frills occasionally brushed against Raven's cheek, sending unexpected shivers down her spine. You respond to contact, Kiri-Th noted, their melodic voice softer than usual. Your skin produces small bumps, and your pulse rate increases. Raven felt heat rise to her cheeks. We call those goosebumps. It's an automatic response to various stimuli. Fascinating, Kiri-Th murmured. Humans are remarkably reactive beings. Every touch seems to elicit a physiological response. Yeah, well, you're pretty interesting yourself, Raven countered, watching the subtle color shifts in their scales. Those patterns in your scales, they're beautiful. Kiri-Th's frills rippled in what might have been pleasure. The chromatic response is involuntary, though we can exercise some control with training. As they talked, Raven found herself increasingly aware of every point of contact between them. The initial awkwardness had given way to something else, a curious intimacy born of their shared predicament. Tell me about your world, she said, partly to distract herself from their proximity. I've never met a Centaurian who was willing to discuss it. Our society values privacy, Kiri-Th responded, their scales shifting to a deeper blue. But perhaps some sharing is acceptable, given our circumstances. They spoke of Centauri Prime's crystal cities, of atmospheric storms that painted the sky in impossible colors, of a culture built on precision and careful thought. Raven shared stories of Earth's oceans, of thunderstorms and snow, of human traditions that seemed to both puzzle and intrigue her companion. Hours passed, and Raven realized something had changed between them. The careful distance they had maintained for months had dissolved, replaced by a tentative understanding. But then a sharp clang echoed through the ship's hull, making them both tense. That sounded like the outer airlock, Raven whispered, her heart racing. Someone's out there. Kiri-Th's scales darkened to a deep purple. The saboteur, perhaps. We need to find out, Raven said, though the thought of leaving their warm sanctuary made her shiver. But we'll need to be careful. Together, Kiri-Th said, their hand finding hers in the dim light. We face this together. The touch was unexpected, intimate in a way that transcended species. Raven squeezed their hand gently, marveling at how natural it felt despite their differences. Together, she agreed, knowing that whatever they discovered out there, nothing between them would ever be quite the same. Trust in darkness. Leaving the relative warmth of the shelter pod felt like stepping into an ice bath. Raven's breath came out in thick white clouds as she and Curie Th made their way through the darkened corridors, guided only by the dim red emergency lighting. The temperature has dropped another 12 degrees, Curie Th observed, their scales now a deep midnight purple. Their voice carried a slight tremor that had nothing to do with fear. We must move quickly. Raven nodded, trying to ignore her own shivering. The sound came from the outer airlock section. If someone's boarding the ship, that's where we'll find evidence. They moved silently through the ship, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Raven was acutely aware of Curie Th's presence beside her, their tall form moving with a grace that seemed unaffected by the cold. Every few steps, their shoulders would brush, sending unexpected warmth through her despite the freezing air. Wait, Curie Th suddenly whispered, their head frills extending fully. Listen. Raven held her breath. At first, she heard nothing but the faint creaking of the ship's hull. Then, a soft mechanical whir, barely audible but distinct. That's not from the airlock, she realized. That's coming from the primary engineering bay. Curie Th's scales rippled with concern. The saboteur is still aboard. Only one way to find out. They changed direction, moving toward the sound. As they approached the engineering bay, Raven felt Curie Th's cool hand slip into hers. The gesture surprised her, but she squeezed back reassuringly. Your body temperature is dropping again, she whispered, feeling the chill of their skin. The cold affects my cognitive functions, Curie Th admitted, their melodic voice strained. Your warmth helps maintain clarity. Raven's heart skipped at the vulnerability in their tone. Stay close then. We need you thinking clearly. They reached the engineering bay's entrance, pausing at the threshold. Inside, they could see a figure hunched over the main power console, working by the light of a small device. That's impossible, Curie Th breathed, their scales shifting rapidly. That's a Centaurian interface device. My people would never. Unless they would, Raven said softly, understanding dawning. The power failure, the precise targeting of critical systems, it all fits. This was an inside job. Curie Th's frills flattened completely, a sign of deep distress. My assignment here was meant to foster trust between our species. If my own people are responsible. Hey, Raven turned to face them, placing her free hand on their cheek. Their scales were like silk under her fingers, surprisingly warm despite the cold. The actions of one don't define an entire species. I trust you. The intensity of Curie Th's gaze made her breath catch. Their scales shifted to a color she'd never seen before, a deep, rich blue with undertones of gold. Your faith in me is unexpected, they said, their voice barely a whisper. Humans continue to surprise me. Good surprise or bad surprise? Raven asked, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. I am beginning to understand why some of my people fear closer relations with humans, Curie Th said, their free hand rising to mirror her gesture, cool fingers tracing her cheekbone. You make us feel things we are not supposed to feel. The moment was shattered by a loud crash from within the engineering bay. They both turned to see the figure at the console straightening up, apparently alerted to their presence. We need a plan, Raven whispered urgently. They'll have weapons, and we're not exactly in fighting shape. Curie Th's scales shifted to a determined blue. I have an idea, but it requires complete trust between us. Are you willing? Raven met their gaze steadily. Always. Then follow my lead, Curie Th said, their hand tightening around hers. And remember, whatever happens, this changes everything between our peoples. As they prepared to confront the saboteur, Raven realized Curie Th was right. Whether they succeeded or failed, the careful distance between human and Centaurian was forever altered. And somehow, that felt exactly right. Shared warmth. Curie Th's plan was as elegant as it was dangerous. As they crouched in the shadows of the engineering bay, Raven felt their cool breath against her ear as they explained in whispers. Their scales had taken on a deep, almost luminescent blue that seemed to pulse with each word. The saboteur will expect Centaurian protocols, they murmured. They will not anticipate human unpredictability combined with our technology. Raven suppressed a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. And you're sure this will work? No, Kiri-Th admitted, their head frills rippling with what might have been amusement. But I trust your instincts. The saboteur was still working at the main console, their own scales a muted gray that spoke of focused concentration. They hadn't noticed the pair yet, too absorbed in their task. Raven took a deep breath, then deliberately knocked over a tool cart. The crash echoed through the bay, making the saboteur whirl around, their scales flashing alarmed purple. Now, Kiri-Th whispered, pressing something cool and smooth into Raven's hand. It was a small crystal, pulsing with a faint inner light. Raven stepped out of the shadows, holding the crystal up. Looking for this? The saboteur's scales shifted rapidly through several colors before settling on an aggressive red. Human, they spat, you don't understand what you're interfering with. Oh, I understand perfectly, Raven said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You're trying to sabotage the first joint human-Centaurian deep space mission. The question is why? The saboteur's hand moved to their belt, where a weapon was holstered. Our species were never meant to mix. This mission is an abomination against natural order. Natural order. Raven couldn't help but laugh, though the sound held no humor. Look around you. The universe doesn't care about your prejudices. While she kept the saboteur talking, Kiri-Th moved silently through the shadows, their own scales perfectly matching the darkness. The plan hinged on timing and trust. You've been corrupted by them, the saboteur hissed, their frills fully extended in aggression. Just like the others who supported this mission. Humans are chaos incarnate. Perhaps, Kiri-Th's voice suddenly rang out from behind them, that is exactly what we need. The saboteur spun, but it was too late. Kiri-Th had already interfaced with the secondary power grid, their scales glowing with transferred energy. The crystal in Raven's hand pulsed in response, creating a feedback loop that momentarily overloaded the saboteur's neural implants. They crumpled to the floor, their scales fading to a dull gray. Raven rushed forward, quickly securing them with emergency restraints while Kiri-Th worked to restore power to the ship's systems. That was, incredibly risky, Kiri-Th said once the saboteur was secured. Their scales had shifted to a complex pattern Raven had never seen before, mixing deep blues with flecks of gold. But it worked, Raven pointed out, moving closer to them. Because we trusted each other. The emergency lights flickered and died, replaced by the normal ship's lighting as power was restored. In the brighter light, Raven could see every subtle shift and pattern in Kiri-Th's scales, every nuance of their expression. Your species continues to fascinate me, Kiri-Th said softly, reaching out to trace a finger along Raven's jawline. Their touch was warmer now, almost matching her own temperature. You act on instinct, on emotion, and somehow it leads to solutions we would never consider. Raven leaned into their touch, her heart racing. Maybe that's why we work so well together. Logic and instinct, order and chaos. The council will not be pleased, Kiri-Th noted, though their tone suggested they cared little for the council's opinion. This incident will raise questions about integration between our species. Good, Raven said firmly. Those questions need to be asked. And answered. Their faces were very close now, Kiri-Th's head frills gently brushing against her cheeks. Their scales had settled into that deep blue with gold undertones, a color Raven was beginning to suspect had special significance. What happens now? She whispered, barely trusting her voice. Now, Kiri-Th replied, their melodic voice equally soft, we write our own protocols. The ship's systems hummed around them, restored to full power, but neither moved away. They had crossed too many boundaries, broken too many rules to go back to the way things were. And as Kirith's scales shifted in response to their proximity, Raven realized she didn't want to go back. Whatever came next would be uncharted territory for both their species. But facing it together felt right in a way no protocol could define. Dawn's light. The aftermath of the sabotage attempt brought more chaos than either of them had anticipated. The ship's communication systems had finally been restored, and the messages from both human and Centaurian authorities were flooding in. Raven sat at her console, watching Kirith explain the situation to their superiors, their scales shifting through subtle shades of blue as they spoke. "The Council demands an immediate inquiry," Kirith said after ending the transmission, their head frills rippling with tension. "They are concerned about the implications." Raven moved closer, noticing how Kirith's scales brightened at her approach. "Concerned that one of their own tried to sabotage the mission, or concerned that we stopped them together?" "Both," they admitted, their voice carrying a new warmth when addressing her. "Our cooperation challenges many long-held beliefs about species separation." The rest of the crew was being awakened from cryo-sleep, but for now, they still had the engineering bay to themselves. The saboteur had been secured in the brig, their fate to be decided by both species authorities. "They'll have to adapt," Raven said, reaching out to trace a pattern on Kirith's arm. Their scales shimmered under her touch, creating ripples of color that followed her fingers. "Just like we did." "You make it sound simple," Kirith said, though their tone held fondness rather than criticism. "My people have maintained strict protocols about interspecies relations for generations. And look where it got us," Raven gestured to the ship around them. "Out here, in the depths of space, those protocols nearly cost us everything. If we hadn't learned to trust each other." She trailed off as Kirith's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally despite their anatomical differences. Their scales had shifted to that now familiar deep blue with gold undertones, a color Raven had come to recognize as one reserved for her alone. "Among my people," Kirith said softly, "this shade of blue is called heart truth. It appears when we can no longer hide from what we feel." Raven's breath caught. "And what do you feel?" "Everything the protocols warn against," they admitted, their free hand rising to cup her cheek. "Chaos. Uncertainty. Hope." The ship's systems hummed around them, a reminder of their victory, of the life they'd preserved. But in that moment, it felt like background noise to the rhythm of their hearts. "The authorities will arrive soon," Raven said, though she made no move to pull away. "They'll want statements, explanations, justifications. Let them come," Kirith's voice held a new confidence. "We have nothing to hide. What happened here, what's still happening, it's bigger than their protocols." As if to emphasize their point, their scales rippled with patterns Raven had never seen before, complex swirls of blue and gold that seemed to dance in the light. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, and completely against every regulation about maintaining emotional distance. "You know," Raven said with a small smile, "for someone whose species values control and order, you're being remarkably rebellious." "Perhaps," Kirith's head frills brushed against her cheek in what she now recognized as a gesture of affection, "you have taught me the value of chaos." The ship's computer announced the approaching arrival of authority vessels, but neither moved to separate. They had faced the cold together, confronted prejudice together, and now they would face the consequences together. "Whatever comes next," Raven said, meeting Kirith's golden eyes, "we face it as one." "As one," Kirith agreed, their scales pulsing with that heart truth blue. "Let them see what happens when order and chaos find harmony." The future was uncertain. There would be questions, investigations, probably opposition from both their peoples. But as they stood together in the engineering bay where their journey had begun, Raven knew they had already won the most important battle, the one against fear and prejudice. Their story would become part of something larger, a testament to what could happen when different species looked past their differences to find connection. And as Kiri-Th's scales shimmered with emotions no protocol could contain, Raven realized that sometimes the greatest discoveries weren't made in the depths of space, but in the space between two hearts. The Authority ships would arrive soon, but for now, in this moment, they had created their own world, one where the boundaries between human and Centaurian, between chaos and order, between protocol and emotion, had dissolved into something new and beautiful. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.